So I've already trued and tightened the spokes, torqued down the spokes on both the front and rear wheels on my SL350. But I wanted to show you the process, even though that this wheel is already done. And the wheel is on a balancing stand. It spins really, really freely. And if I actually just let it go, the heaviest part of the rim will end up down at the bottom. Well, obviously it doesn't make any sense to balance a rim without a tire on it, but I multi-function my machine this way. I use it for balancing after the tire's on. I use it for a truing stand when the tire's off. You can see that part of this little apparatus right down here is a pointer device, and the pointing device is a little silicone cap, and it's not rigid at the end. It's actually quite flexible. I can adjust the pointer device so it just barely touches the rim, and when the rim is out of round this way or out of line with the center of the hub, that little silicone cap rubs on the rim, and I can actually see which way I have to pull the rim or push the rim to make it back in line. So I have tightened the spoke down all evenly, and I use the threads on the spoke as a gauge for how high up the nipple rides, and I make sure that they all go down absolutely evenly all the way around, using that, like I said, the spoke thread as that gauge. Once the spoke threads are no longer visible, then I go around in this fashion and I tighten each spoke about 1/8 of a turn until they bed into the rim, and where I can't tighten these spokes any longer with my fingers. I always start at the valve stem hole and end at the valve stem hole. That way I make sure that every spoke has had the same attention. Then I start tightening the spokes with a spoke wrench, like this one right here, until they actually get stiff. And I do the same method, go all the way around, starting at the valve stem hole and ending at the valve stem hole. Once I have a decent amount of tension on each spoke, which is barely snug, but enough tension to actually make it so the rim doesn't wobble back and forth, then I'll check it for up and down, and this rim is not up and down at all, which has meant that I did the job in making sure that the hub was centered when I was tightening those spokes. And then in line, which is in center line, back and forth using this pointer device here. Now, generally speaking, the rims aren't perfect when they come from the factory. You got to remember that these rims started out as a straight piece of metal. They cut it, rolled it on a die, welded it, ferried out that weld as best they could, and then chromed it. So these things aren't perfect when they come from the factory, but they're plenty close enough, that's for sure. And there'll be slight deviations in the side of the rim that you'll have to compensate for in your adjustment of keeping the rim in line. So as I'm spinning this rim around, this little silicone cap, or my pointing device, is going to touch. And where it touches, I'm going to mark on the right-hand side of the rim, and where it stops touching, I'm going to mark it again. The distance between these two marks will allow me to assess if I'm going to push or I'm going to pull that area. Now, since the area between the marks is less than half the total circumference of the rim, I'd be inclined to pull these spokes away from center so it quits hitting my reference pointer. So between these two marks, which are right here and right here, is approximately 6 spokes, or actually 4 spokes on the right-hand side. I go to the center of my reference marks that I used a felt pin on, and I tighten those 2 spokes first, turn and a half, or a half a turn or so. And then I go closer to my reference mark and I tighten it a little bit less because obviously the center is going to be the most out. And then I go back and I check my pointer device. When the pointing device quits hitting or quits touching the rim, I can adjust mine out with a little knob. You can actually just tap it forward. And now I have less out of line than I did before. I can remark the rim to that defect. Assess where I'm going to push or pull depending on how much of the circumference I'm actually needing to adjust. And in this particular one, I still need to pull it, so I'm going to only tighten the spokes on the right-hand side and pull that rim, starting from the center of my deviation, which is the most amount of pressure I'm going to put on it, and then removing pressure as I get closer to my reference marks. And it is pretty much that easy. It takes some concentration because I can tell you that I was trying to do the whole thing on video, but I found that I really couldn't talk and then pay attention to what I was doing. The amount of true that you would actually put to a rim would be specific to how fast the motorcycle, what the demands of speed are on the motorcycle. This motorcycle is going to do about 60 miles an hour. So if it was within, like, say, a 16th or an 8th up and down and a 16th to an 8th side to side, you would likely never ever feel it at those speeds. My personal qualification is 0 deviation. That means I tweak on this rim, a quarter's tweak here, a quarter tweak there, until I get that thing as good as I can do it, as good as I can make it. The difference between like a 16th and 0 deviation is only about 2 or 3 minutes more of pulling the spokes or releasing tension on the spokes to make that thing as perfect as you possibly can. So I highly recommend that you tweak on it until you actually get it as close as you possibly can, even though the tolerance for good enough is much, much, much greater than that. So now I say I've got the wheel in line as much as I need it to be in line, which is to me 0 deviation. You're going to see some fluctuations in the rim that have to do with the manufacturing process that you're not going to be able to take out at all, because that's just imperfections in the metal, in the face of the metal. And by doing a few of these things, you'll be able to tell the difference between imperfections in the manufacturing and what you can actually take out by pushing and pulling on those spokes. So then I'm going to tighten each spoke, by my experience, as tight as I think they need to be. And then after I do that, I'm going to check for deviations again. I'm going to make those adjustments that it would take to actually make 0 deviations in my rim, and then go back and check those spokes again. I'm going to make sure that all the spokes are as tight as my experience dictates they need to be. So a good indicator is that once you feel that the torque is correct, which this torque is correct, you can give the spoke a little tap, and it makes a specific tone. The length of the spoke and the tightness of the spoke is going to dictate what tone that spoke's going to have, henceforth tuning a wheel, right? So I'm going to hit every single spoke, and I'm going to wait to hear like a flat spoke. That's a flat sounding spoke. I know that that one needs to be tighter, and then I can hear the difference in tightness by the different tone the spokes make. I don't know how long it takes for somebody to learn how to do this. But if you hear the tone to all my spokes, you can see between a flat and a sharp that this wheel has the same tightness pretty much all the way around. They're as tight as I need them to be. I've got 0 deviation up and down. I've got zero deviation. Well, my camera went to standby again, so I had to restart it. But what I was saying was that I have 0 deviation from side to side and 0 deviation up and down, so the rim is exactly the way I want it to be before I put the tire on it. And just a couple more pieces of information. It's not unusual for spokes to protrude out past the nipple, depending on who supplied your spokes to you. If that does happen, make sure that you grind the spoke down so it is flush with the nipple, because any protruding spoke, even with a good rim liner, will play havoc with tubes. Start to finish, the truing and tightening process takes about 15 minutes is all. And it took me 12 minutes just to explain it to you. That's probably why it was so complicated when I was trying to do it from the beginning of the process to the end. You really do have to concentrate on it, but it's not difficult. Lace and true a wheel is 30 to 45 minutes, and even if you've never done it before, so it takes you twice that long. If you exercise a little patience, you'll be able to get it right. I hope that was all informative and interesting to you, and I'll catch you on the next video in this series.